Welcome to the FMS platform session on General Ledger Part 1. We have presented this to all of the offices live at this point, so this is the makeup webinar. The course information for the training materials can be located at this address on our server. When you click there, you'll get to this box. And then there's a CPE evaluation form, which you don't need to worry about. That's for the live seminars. But the slides for each of the Part 1, so General Ledger Part 1 and 2, and then if you were here for the portal and dashboard last week, you can get the slides there as well. There's also an FMS portal overview based on last week's seminar. Again, if you if you'll send me an email that you attended today, I will mark you off on the attendance log. And then, of course, the CPE was only available during the live seminars. Okay, the learning objectives that we're going to cover today under General Ledger Part 1 is how to set up bank accounts correctly. That's so that Reconet and the Treasury Management team can use the bank accounts in our system efficiently. Also, what we're going to know the difference between the close and the pre-close process and when to perform each of those actions. How and when to close income and expenses to retained earnings. How to access and maintain the store chart of accounts and how to look up transactions. Creating, posting journal entries, cash receipts, transfers, the differences between all those things. When and how to create and post statistical entries. Working with inventory accounts, working with our reports menu, and how to inquire on account balances. We're also going to look at some of the client menus as well. So General Ledger Part 1 is geared toward the working accountant here at FMS. Basically just what you need for the period end close. Tomorrow in the General Ledger Part 2, we'll go into each of the menu options that we did not cover today and look in depth at the behind the scenes sort of things that go on there and more advanced topics. Okay, course prerequisites. To really understand what's going on here, you need access to the FMS software and also some basic accounting knowledge, so debits and credits. Nothing too complicated, just positive for debits and negative for credits. If you need access to the FMS software and you don't have it for some reason, contact the FMS support desk and they will provide that to you. All right, let's go ahead and get started. We're going to start with bank accounts. The way we get to bank accounts is through the General Ledger, Company, Corp, Store menu, and bank accounts. While there, a unique bank code is required, a blank space in front of the ABA number, and the check recon client number must be set up. So let's take a look at an actual setup here. So General Ledger, Company, Corp, Store menu, bank accounts. And you can see the list of bank accounts here. We'll click on this operating account, click edit. And you can see you'll put in whatever description that you want. The bank code, in this case is COMM. It could be your company number and AP after whatever you want to make it. It has to be unique. And then the ABA code for the US is going to be right justified. So you see there's 9 digits here. And then the account number, doesn't matter if you put the spaces in or not, but you can put the account number here. Service Bureau account's going to be a no. The only Service Bureau accounts we have in the AS library is going to be the bank accounts for FMS. And then if you had a recon client number, in this case it's a payroll account, they should have had a recon client number set up in here. So we're going to create one, call it 420. Then if you just hit enter and confirm, that will lock that in. You can see the last payroll check number was 114. That'll increase as the payroll checks are cut. And then down below you see where the check overlay information has been put in. So this says for AP check runs, and then the AP overlay was AP 420. Typically, when you see an overlay name in the print overlay field, that means those checks are printed at an FMS office and wherever that's pointed to. So the checkout queue is pointed to FMS magnetic ink printer 1. Remittance out queue is going to this printer here. If you leave the remittance blank and the register blank, whoever kicks off the AP run, those things will show up in their spool file in the software. So just kind of keep that in mind. If our clients have an in-store printer, typically the checkout queue is going to be the overlay name, and that tells the system what printer to send those checks to at the client's site. And the same thing with the remittance and the register. Then the last check number is going to increase as AP check runs are made. So if I hit enter here, it's going to take us to, actually, if you're creating a new one and you hit enter, it takes you to page 2. It's going to take you to this screen, which has got the bank address and some originating information. This only needs to be set up in here if the client is using the ACH feature to pay accounts payable. That's covered in another chapter. But there is a video on YouTube covering accounts payable ACH if you'd like to check that out. But anyway, this information is typically left blank until it's needed for ACH. That's it for basic account setup. You need it to be set up exactly like this so that it works properly with the system and the check overlays and things like that. For those of you who just joined, if you have any questions, just speak up and I'll repeat those back for the video. All right. Now, the corporate bank GL accounts is the second part of the bank account setup, but the highlights of that is each account in the system should be mapped to a corresponding location within the general ledger. So we want a one-to-one relationship always so that those bank accounts will work in the ReconNet system. What we don't want is a client using, say, general ledger account 1101 for their operating account, and they change banks and decide to keep the same general ledger account number. That's not very helpful, and it makes it really hard to do reconciliations and impossible to do it if they're on ReconNet. So if they change banks, create a new general ledger cash account to go with that bank. So the last thing to do is to designate which account will be the default account for those corporations, or for each corporation. All right, so to get there, you just go back and scroll down to corporate bank GL accounts. And this is going to bring up all the bank accounts for the company, but the ones in green are the ones that are activated for that particular corporation. And they only turn green once you assign a GL account to them. So you can see this main account down here has nothing assigned and it's in black text. Alright, so looking at this operating account, you can see that we've added in the corporation that it belongs to, the store that it belongs to, the department, and the account. In addition, there's an AP run with a Y here. That means it's the default AP account for that corporation. In our system, we only allow one default AP account per corp. So if they decide to change banks and they change to, say, this bank as their AP, then all you have to do is highlight that and hit toggle default account and it will move it to there. Of course, an overlay would need to be set up for that particular bank, etc., so that everything works when the checks are cut. We'll move that back for now. And really, once you get in here, you're looking at the view bank account. It's the same information that we just entered in. The toggle company and corp level, and you can see this one's toggled to the corporation level and the company level. That's really based on how the client is set up. If they have one bank account at the company level that pays for multiple corporations, then you would set those things up accordingly. Typically, though, once you set this up, everything works fine. All right. If there are no questions, I'll move forward. We'll move into calendars. So again, we're operating from the general ledger, company corp store menu was where the bank accounts were, and now we're going to go back a step and go to the calendars menu. So what we're going to look at first is closing periods by corporation, how to pre-close weeks by corporation, and then closing income and expenses to retained earnings by corporation. All right. So in this section here, you see the close and the pre-close. One thing to notice, close corporate periods or pre-close corporate weeks. When we do a pre-close, that basically says it's what some other accountants call a soft close. It only allows certain types of transactions to be posted once that pre-close is set for that particular week. So in order to see which ones are allowed, if you look at transaction pre-close authority briefly for that corporation, you'll see which types of entries are allowed to pierce that pre-close. So inventory points, journal entries done by FMS accountants, or the JE type entries typically. In this case, the Reckonet entries, the UEs, the YR and ZR are retained earnings entries. Those all are the only ones right now that are allowed to pierce the pre-close. So you'll notice that accounts payable entries do not. So if you have set the pre-close and the client's still entering AP, and they try to put it into that week, it's going to push it to the first open week. So keep that in mind when you're closing periods. There's a common report in Empower called the pre-close report you can run as of a certain date and see if anything posted into the next period. That'll help you with your accruals. But anyway, in order to pre-close a week, we'll do that before we close. Click pre-close corporate weeks by corporation. Pick your corporation. And it's going to come open with the last closed period, and then you'll see the weeks that are open. So in this case, we have this first week, 45 pre-close. If I wanted to advance that, I would advance it. And you can see it just keeps advancing. Now, if you get to a point where there's an unposted entry or an errored entry in that week, it will not allow you to advance the pre-close until you clear those. To reopen them, you just click that. I'm going to go ahead and reopen week 45 so we can reopen a closed period. That's all there is to pre-closing a period. Typically, once bank recs have been started, you're going to want to go ahead and advance your pre-close through the end of your period if it hasn't been done already. Here you can see the pre-close was canceled for week 49 because there were some open items still existing. All right, the closed corporate periods by corporations next. So once you're done with your financial statements or you're ready to roll or close parts of the year, just go in here, pick the corporation code, and now you see that it's by period, not by week. And the last one that was closed is at the top here. So if I want to close period 11, all I need to do is hit advanced period close. And you see it rolled up. So now period 11 is closed and 12 is the first one that's open. Now if I try to close period 12, there's a couple of issues. One says an open transaction exists in a prior period. Well, because this is a demo store, I'm not going to go clear those because we need those for training purposes. But the second thing I would get would say period close canceled, income and expenses need to be closed to retained earnings. So in order to do that, you would just jump back one, and this next thing here, close income and expense to retain earnings by corporation. So you click that, click your corporation code, and now you choose the year that you want to close. So whatever year it is, go to period 12 and hit select. And then if it's successful, it will close and it will say that the close to retain earnings was successful down here. Now you can go back into here and close the period 12 and then move on into the next year. That's really important for when you're closing out, moving into January or period 1 after the end of the year, because your trial balance will not balance until the previous year is closed. You can always reopen and make changes if you get CPA adjustments or something after the fact. but to move forward into period 1, you have to close out retained earnings. All right, any questions on that? Let me go back in here and reopen that period that I closed. That's done. Okay, the store chart of accounts are next. First, we're going to look at the list of accounts and then how to add and delete or edit those accounts, and then how to copy it to a template or to a store. So, general ledger, and then the next menu is chart of accounts menu. We're going to start with store chart of accounts. Put in your corporation and your store. And you should have the accounts listed here, starting with Department 1 and going through the range of accounts. Anytime you see the yellow boxes here, you can jump down. So if I wanted to go down to the grocery accounts, I could just put a 100 in there for grocery, and it jumps right down into the list of grocery accounts. So you see inventory, so on, and sales, so on and so forth. So let's pull up the sales account. Hit view. So most of you will be working in one of our common environments, the AS library, the Seattle library, whatever it is. There's a master list of accounts in there. Don't go in and make changes to accounts that are already in existence, and we'll cover that more tomorrow. But if you make a change, for example, to grocery sales and you wanted to call it something else, that's going to affect everybody that uses this account, so in that library. So be real careful with that. Don't make any changes. You'll probably get a nasty email from someone. But anyway, looking inside the account here, you see the company, corp, and store, of course, that it's assigned to, the department, the account, description, and then the parent department. In this case, the parent department is itself. It's a grocery. We'll talk more about parent departments when we get to inventory setup. The retail status is off for this client. It's an active account. If it was a usage taxable account, you could flag it here. And if it's an in-store eligible account, I'm not really sure what that means. I have to look that up in the manual. And then we've got the class and the code, and then whether or not it's a 1099 eligible account. So just to highlight the 1099, since we're coming up to the end of the year here, whenever 1099s are running the system on a vendor, the vendor has to be a 1099 vendor. So on page 2 of the AP vendor screen, they have to have their the type of 1099 they want in their tax ID number, and the account that they make payments to needs to be flagged as a 1099 eligible account so that the system can pull all of those payments. Anyway, this is the whole list of accounts listed by account number. If you wanted to look at it by department, all you need to do is click Update by Department. And then now you see each department that we have accounts in will have a star here. So the general department, if I hit select, then all of the available accounts are listed here, and you set the page down and see the ones that have been selected for Department 1. Same thing with grocery. And you can see all of those here. So that's a way to quickly see what accounts are available, or to add or drop accounts based on department. Now, since we're in here, let's look at the inventory setup just briefly. Tomorrow we'll go into this more in depth. All right, so click Inventory Setup. And now you can see we've got all these codes that are listed here, and we'll cover these tomorrow. But basically, inventory has been set up for grocery. It's its own parent, which means that all sales, all purchases for the grocery department will go towards estimating and calculating the inventory amount here. If it was a child department, and we'll look at an example of that in just a second, they would not have an inventory account. All the sales and all the purchases for the child department would roll up into whatever their parent is. But anyway, so we have all these settings here, so you can kind of see what goes into estimating inventory for this department. So they use markups, markdowns, adjustments, sales, purchases, variance, and shrink to create their inventory adjustments. And you can see the list of the rest of the accounts that have been assigned to grocery are here, but they have nothing to do with inventory, so they have no flags. All right, let's look for a child department. Here's one. So we'll lock this into meat. So you see meat is its own parent. Its chart parent's 400, its actual inventory parent is 400, and that's fine. Hot foods, for example, its chart parent is 525, but its inventory parent is meat. So when inventory is being calculated, all of the sales and purchases for hot foods will roll up into the meat calculation, and then the inventory count will be posted against that. You can see bulk foods here is rolling up into produce, 600, same kind of deal. So if we looked at the actual inventory setup, they're only going to have flags for sales and purchases because they're going to roll up into the parent department. So if you're closing periods and you can hear parent-child, or you're trying to find out why there's more sales showing up on your structured report than it's actually in the meat department or whatever, that's probably because there's a child department that's rolling into it. All right, the next thing is to copy the template or the store. This is only going to come into play typically if your client that's in existence is opening up a new store and you have to create a chart of accounts. For example, if they wanted the chart that's on 420 to be copied exactly to, say, store 421, which is be a new store, you can take this existing chart of accounts and copy it to a template. So all you do is click copy to template and then find the template number that you've already set up. So in this case, we'll just pick one. It doesn't matter. Hit OK. And you confirm that it will copy it to that template. It's in existence. Now to go find that template, you just go back one, and here at the top is chart templates, and that's where we were. And so, for example, any of these, this is the one that we used. All you have to do, if you want to look at the detail, you can look at it, and it will be there. And then to copy it to a store, you just highlight it and hit copy add to store. And you tell it what store to copy it to. You can also copy it to all stores within a particular corporation, or all corps and stores within a particular company. So it kind of makes it easier if you're setting up a lot of stores at once. But again, you'd only use this if you're setting up a new store for the client. Okay. The next thing we're going to look at as a GL is going to be the transaction reference option. So we have 4. So from General Ledger, we're going to click the transaction entry menu, and we're going to look at these top 4 ways to reference journal entries. So the first one is company entries by corporation and source. Click on that. It's going to default to unposted. So when you click in here and you see items listed here, these are all unposted items, and if you want to pre-close the weeks that they're in, you'll have to clear these. Either delete them, post them, figure out what's wrong with them, etc. In this case, these are all AP entries. To look at one, you just highlight it, and you can go through View or Edit. It's the same thing, except in Edit, of course, you can edit an unposted entry. And once you go in here, you can change the dates, the amounts, etc. You can edit the GL distribution, especially if you change the amount, it's going to force you to do this. But if it's an AP entry, you could change the vendor and the invoice number at this point if it's in error, as long as it's unposted and hasn't been part of a previous check run. You can go in and edit the 1099 amounts. You can actually click manual payments here and make a manual payment directly from this entry, and it'll attach itself. But let's go ahead and look at the edit GL distribution, since we're looking at General Ledger today. And once you get in here, you just want to make sure that your entry is balanced, and then you can post. If you hit complete, then you can go out here and post them all at once. There's various ways to do that. We'll get to that on another screen. Anyway, this is a list of the unposted entries. The other items across the top are going to be, you can copy an entry, whether it's posted, unposted, or whatever. You can copy it and it will make an unposted entry that you can then change the date or etc. You can reverse it. It'll create a reversing entry. Of course, if it's a journal entry, you can unpost it. If it's AP entries, typically you can unpost or edit. Depends on whether they're paid or not. And then the transaction button will take you right into the GL we were just looking at. This particular entry is out of balance. And then if there's any messages, there'll be an M listed in this column, and you click on messages and it will typically tell you what's wrong with the entry. There's probably errored entry here. I toggled over a field and here's errored, so you can see there's a message there. So if you look at that, it says, you know, in this example, this vendor, Keebler, is not authorized for produce purchases. So the authorized account that's set up for that particular entry needs to be changed, or the entry needs to be updated. And the other option is image. Previous to the last release, we weren't able to click on any AP images from the GL screens, but now we can click on GL, payroll, etc. If there's an image, there'll be an I in this column. So for example, this Frito-Lay image, and we'll just click image and it'll open up a PDF version in your browser. And let's see if I have a browser open. There it goes. So you can see here, there's a PDF version in the browser. Okay. Toggle again and you have your list of posted entries from the beginning of when the store or the client came on with FMS. You can filter this down a bit. If you want to just see journal entries for store 420 as of 12/27/02, hit enter, it will filter down in the list and try to find that for you. If you know the entry number, you can type that in as well. One thing to note on unposted entries, if you want to go in and make a change, and you go in and hit edit, it's not going to let you change the corp, store, department, or account unless you hit this chart of account access button to unlock it. And basically when you do that, it unlocks the fields up here as well as the account numbers, so you could change them at that time. Clicking it again locks everything back down. Then you can just post. Okay, the reason that one is called company entries by corporation and source is because corporation and source are the first two columns here that you can filter with. The next one is corporate entries by transaction date. So following that same logic, when we click here, transaction date is going to be the first thing we see, and you're able to filter by corporation. As far as the rest of the information goes, it's exactly the same as the other one we just looked at. It's just the way that the items are organized. Okay, the next one is entries by user. Again, the same information. These are the same buttons that were available on the other two, but it's by the user that you're signed in for. You can go in and change that user if you want to look at what another person has done, and you just choose that from the list, and it will show their entries, unposted, errored, etc. One thing that I recommend for our AP people who are entering in a lot of AP is to, once they're done for the day or for the job, is to go in here and look at entries by user and see if there's anything unposted or errored that they might have missed. And the last one is entries by creation date range. Again, it's going to default to today's date, whatever date you're logged in. If there are no entries for that day, you can change the date and look at a broader range if you'd like. This helps you also look to see what's been done for a particular day and if anything needs to be posted or unposted or fixed. You can see there's nothing there for today. Buttons across the top are the same as the other three. Are any questions on referencing transactions out of the system? Okay. The next section is going to be creating transactions. So we're going to look at journal entries, cash receipts, transfers, user transaction source entries, and statistical entries. Bring the system back in here. So again, general ledger, transaction entry menu, and now we see our direct entry for journal entries, cash receipts, etc. So let's start with journal entries. This is going to be the JE type entry. And really all you have to do is put in your corporation and store, your company if you're in the main library and you're not locked in or defaulted to that company. These are really header information. It doesn't really matter what stores you post the entries to in the GL distribution as long as they're part of this company. However, we try to keep it by store if that's the way you're doing it. It's easier for you to look it up that way when you go to do the filters in those four lookups that we just looked at. So put in a date. You can either type it in and hit tab, it'll put the slashes in, or you can choose from the calendar. I'm going to make this for 2008. And then whatever the description is. Now we have some options for reversals. You can do no reversal, which means it'll make the entry as is, no reversing. You can do a period reversal, which will cause the system to create a reversing entry at the first day of the next period. You can do an unposted reversal, which creates the reversing entry but leaves it unposted. The reason you would use that is, for example, if you're on a quick turnaround for one of your clients and you haven't generated weekly reports yet, you don't want all of your period accruals reversing before you generate those weekly reports. That would cause those to look pretty funny. So we do this with one of our clients where we leave it unposted until the weekly reports are out, and then those are posted. Did someone have a question? Okay, if you could, whoever that is, if you could put your phone on mute, that would be helpful. Thanks. All right, also we have the week reversal, so this will reverse at the beginning of the next week. Quarter reversal, the beginning of the next quarter. End of week reversal, if you want it to reverse the last day of the current week that you're in for some reason. And then a year reversal will be the first day of the next year. The last one is user-defined reversal date, and you can put in whatever date you want that reversing entry to post. We'll go back to no reversal for this one. If you have memorized entries set up for your client, you can use a memorized entry here. If you check that box and hit enter, it will bring up a list of memorized entries to choose from. If everybody will put their phone on mute, that would be helpful. Thank you. All right, hitting enter or hitting OK to move into the next screen is our GL distribution. Now it's up to you to put in the corp, store, department, and account and cost for each item. So in this case, we'll just put in something to a miscellaneous expense, say $100. And if I hit enter, you see it brought in the description for the account, and the balance is out by $100. So it's saying I need a credit of 100 to make it 0. Now, if I get in here and I want to, I don't know what the account is that I want or the department, I can hit F4 at any part in our system typically, and you'll get a drop-down list. In this case, we get access to the chart of accounts. So we find the department that we want, whatever it is. And then you can also filter down if you want to look for a particular account to put this to. You can hit select and it will fill it in for you. One thing to note in our system, as most of you know, any credits, the negative symbol goes at the end of the amount. When you hit enter, the balance is now 0, and this is ready to post or complete to be posted later. That's really all there is for entering a journal entry. Again, once you've locked in, once you hit enter and lock those in, you have to hit chart of account access to make any changes. Questions on journal entries? All right, the next one we're going to cover is cash receipts. We're going to skip over inventory adjustments. We'll cover that tomorrow. Cash receipts are next. Most of the time, when FMS accountants are entering in cash receipts, we're doing it through an upload of a spreadsheet. This is the manual way to do it. We do have some clients that enter these in manually, but I doubt there are any FMS accountants that are going in every day and entering manual cash receipts for their clients. I'll show you about it in case you get a question. Again, company corp stores the header, the transaction date. We'll just continue with the same one. And typically, if there's a cash receipts entry, we have a memorized entry set up for that for them if they're doing it manually, because remembering everything you have to key in every day for cash receipts is pretty large. So let's click on that memorized entry and see if there's one available for us. And you can see it brought up the cash receipt memorized entries. So let's pick one. We'll just pick one that says lottery deposits. And since we have the memorized entry, it's going to automatically fill in the corp store department and account for us. And then it has put an amount in here. We can change that amount. That was set up in the memorized entry itself. So in this case, if it's $100, we'll just leave it alone. You hit enter and it's going to move to the next account that's set up in the memorized entry. Well, there must be only two in here because it's got the amount in here for cash lottery. So let's hit enter and see what it does. Okay, the reason this popped up, this is going to be the statistic for that cash deposit that we just entered in. So anytime you enter in a cash deposit or a debit to cash or through a cash receipts type entry, whether it's in the system through an upload or manually, the system requires you to put in a statistic to tell you what type of cash it is. So if it was a check, a credit card, cash itself, whatever. If you hit F4 here, it's going to bring up the list of the available types that we have. So in this case, we're just going to say it's cash. You can see all the different things we have there. When you do it manually, it asks for a deposit number. Typically, our clients don't have that, so we're just going to put a 1 here. Put in the date, and then the amount. You can put the time if you want. Now the transaction amount equals the total deposits. I'm going to hit complete, and now we're ready to move on. You can see that this memorized entry only had 2 items. If we wanted to add more at this point, you could certainly go in and do that. And you just post. But cash receipts are going to be anything, typically any kind of office deposit or a entry from the front end of the store. So any of the point of sale entries, you should get all your sales, all your deposits, all your rebates, all your paid outs, all that stuff that equals one balanced entry. Okay. The next type of entry is transfers entries. So here's transfers. This is going to make a TR type entry in the system. This could be done with a journal entry, but this gives the client a little bit more control over their transfers, and it also gives them a way to look those up quickly because the entry type is TR. We have some options here. If we have a larger client and they have transfer sheets that are pre-numbered, you put the number in here. I don't know, we don't have one, so we're going to go with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Type is next. So you can see there's 5 different options here. Typically, we're going to be using option 3, which is the entire entry. That means that one person's entering in both the sent and the receive of transfer. We do have the option to set that up where somebody can go in here and say they're sending $100 worth of inventory from meat to deli, for example, and the meat manager says, okay, I sent that. And then the deli manager would have to go in and put in a 2 to say they received it before the entry could actually be posted. Then there's some adjustments to those things with the 4 and the 5. That gets pretty complicated unless you've got a client that's got a rigid control environment. I would recommend that they always use the 3 so they can do both sides. So that's what we'll do today. Put in a 3 and hit confirm. It's going to bring up the description field. Put in the date of the transfer, and then the from corporation and the from store. If it's within the store, that's going to be also the to store. Once you hit enter and confirm, it's going to bring you into a GL distribution similar to the journal entry. type, but now you see that you've got a TR type entry, and this is going to be the description of it. So we'll go from meat purchases to deli purchases. They don't have a deli, so let's change it to produce just to make it work. And now you've got your debit, credit, you're in balance, and you're ready to post. And that's it. All right, the next type is user transaction source entries. Typically, as FMS accountants, we're not going to be using this one at all unless we need to create some type of entry that's different than a JE, a CR, or a TR. So if we put in 420 for our corporate store, as we've been using, now the user source code is searchable as well. So in this case, we have an option to make a UE type entry, which would look like a Reckonet entry, a UJ, which would be a user transaction. Typically, when our clients put in journal entries, it's going to come through as a UJ. A UU for a user journal entry as well in this case, and depends on the environment that you're at, what options you have. And then there's a ZP type entry. Typically, we're not going to be in here making these entries, but if we did, it's going to work just like a regular journal entry, except for choosing the source code. And again, it's just the same debits and credits. One thing to note, let me delete that first. One thing to note when you're putting in journal entries, there's a button up here called Get Image Batch. We'll cover that more in depth when we do the indexing seminar next year. But basically, you can any type of GL entry you can apply notes to that. For example, if you're entering in a notes payable loan, you can scan in the loan documents and attach that to that particular entry here. You can also go down here after the fact and find an already posted entry and index it from here at the bottom. The last type of entry we're going to talk about today is statistical entries. Alright, so when you go in here and add a statistical journal entry, again, the company, corp, and store. Please put your phone on mute. Thank you. So whatever the date and description is. And the difference with a statistical entry as opposed to a regular journal entry is you're going to pick specific statistical accounts to adjust. So you can see here we've got some deposits, we've got square footage, customer accounts, etc. And it doesn't have to balance. So if I wanted to add 100 customers to August 8th for that store, that's all I would have to do. Keep in mind this is not a replacement, it's an increment. So if there's already 100 there and you add 100 more, it's going to show up as 200 on your report. It's not going to overwrite what's already in the system. And you just post that. That's it for creating transactions. Okay, moving on to inventory counts and retail factors. Okay, so from General Ledger, we have the inventory menu here. And then we've got store inventory and then the retail factors. So let's talk about retail factors first. Go into our company and our corporation. This is how you recalculate them. Let's actually go in and look at them. And you can see here we've got the current retail factors set up for grocery and meat is 25.36% and 30% for meat. Typically, if our client is doing regular cost accounting, they're going to supply us with a retail factor, or we're going to use like the previous year's total or whatever it was for gross profit to put in here for what they're expecting for grocery, meat, produce, bakery, etc. If they're a retail accounting client, then they're typically calculating these retail factors every week based on their sales and their purchases that's captured at both cost and retail. What that's going to do is allow them to estimate their inventory based on their most up-to-date retail factor that they have. So and they'll estimate inventory every week, and they keep that perpetual inventory rolling throughout the year. But for most of our clients, they're just giving us a retail factor of what they expect. We either estimate inventory at the end of the period or put in an inventory count. The system would then estimate and then apply that physical count, and then the difference would be the shrink that gets posted to the shrink expense. But basically, if we wanted to change a retail factor, or we wanted to add one, say for produce, you click on the department, hit retail factors, and now at this point you can recalculate if you're on retail accounting, or you can just enter in the manual retail factor. Let's enter in the manual at this time. We'll say it's 15%. Put in a 15, and now you see it's been added. It tells you who did it. If we back out, now you see that the retail factor has been entered. Notice there are no inventory points yet. Okay, so if it was bakery and wanted to calculate it, we're going to hit retail factors, and we'll pretend they're on retail accounting. You'll click recalculate retail factor, and it's going to say, okay, the period, the date, and then you would just enter in and it would calculate that for us. Since they're not on retail, it's not going to work. So we'll just enter one in. And now it's there. Okay, so at this point, that's the retail factor. Now if we had an inventory count that we wanted to put in, all we do is select the department, click inventory points, and now we can either calculate the inventory point, which would be an estimate, or we can actually put in the physical one. So let's say we want to estimate it first. So typically you would estimate during periods where there are no counts. Hit calculate, tell the interval, whether it's week, day, period, quarter, whatever. We'll choose period, and then the period end date. I'm not sure which one it was. We'll just hit that. And if there was actual transactions, you'd have the current inventory balance, purchases, sales, and a new inventory balance. At that point, you'd post that, and then it would go in here. This is a demo environment, so we've got people have posted things over and over throughout the year, so there's not much left for the system to grab. But if we wanted to actually post a count, go to inventory points, inventory count entry, and now you're going to pick the inventory date, which is going to be your period end date, and then your count date, which would be the actual date counted. The system then would make an adjustment based on sales and purchases between those two dates, and it would cost sales down at the retail factor that was entered in. So we're going to hit calculate count, and you can see that it's saying that the current inventory is 5105. There were purchases. The sales at cost were this. The actual count was 200,000. So shrink was this much. This is a little bit unrealistic, but at least you can kind of see how the system is bringing in these figures. You hit confirm post, and it'll post that at 200,000 based on the count that you put in. Now the system behind the scenes has gone in and made journal entries for all the inventory adjustments, the inventory shrink, and things of that nature. So tomorrow we'll talk about the accumulators and how to not affect your inventory that's already been booked. That's pretty much it for the store inventory for retail factors and inventory. The reports menu is next. So from General Ledger, then reports menu. We're going to look at how to run structured reports, how to run single and multi-store reports. We'll look at the detailed general ledger, the general journal, and trial balance reports. All right, so basically define and run structured reports is our structured report writer. This is where our P&Ls are going to be, balance sheets, cash flow statements, things like that. Alright, so we'll highlight one, and all we have to do to run that is click Extracts, and then Run New Extract. Put in a title. Make sure you pick what stores you want it to run through. In this case, we're going to have it print the store details and then final totals. However you set these up is going to be what you get as far as subtotals go. Since it's one corporation, if I put corporation totals and company totals, I would get the same information printed twice. There's no reason for all of that. Same thing with final totals. Final totals is going to print whatever selection criteria you put in this report. So in this case, with one company and one corp, we're going to get store details and final totals. If I clicked all three of these, it would be three of the repeat information, so there's no reason to waste paper or resources doing that. Make sure this print after extract is checked. In this case, it's unchecked because this was set up to export to the dashboard. I'm going to take that off at this point so it doesn't go to dashboard. And then you're going to put in the fixed date. So this is going to be your period end date. Let's actually go back in time a little bit. See if we get some more information. I'm going to change that to one store to make it run faster. Click enter and confirm, and now we wait for this to change to print complete. It's not going to show up until you hit refresh, and that was pretty quick. So let's go over to our portal. Make sure we have that information. All right. And here you can see the reports ran. Let me blow that up for you guys. So basically, however the report's set up, in this case it's set up for each type. So we've got current period, last year of the same period, and then year to date and last year to date. We could add variance columns, you could add quarter to date, you could put budget columns in here, whatever you want with the structured report writers available. But that's how you run the reports out of there. Okay, running the reports for a single store report. You go back to the reports menu and define and run single and multi-store reports. These are typically what we call canned weekly reports. And basically, they're already set up in the system. There's not a whole lot of changes we can make to them. There are some ways to customize some items at the end of the report. But basically, you hit extract and print, and you can you can run a report for either the single or the multi-store report. Basically, a single store report is going to show one store's information. The columns will be departments. A multi-store report would be one page would be, say, grocery, and the columns would be the different stores, and you're comparing grocery. Then at the end, you compare total stores. For now, we'll pick the single store report. And again, the company and corp is only necessary for a multi-store report header. Pick our company. We'll do 421. Hierarchies we'll talk about more in depth tomorrow, but basically you have the option of running it either way. A hierarchy, for example, if you're running a range of stores and you only wanted stores 1, 2, 3, and 5 and leave out store 4, you can set a hierarchy up that would do that. We're going to uncheck print child departments and print cash detail. Typically our clients don't want to see this. It's unreconciled cash at that point, but they might want to see their list of deposits or something like that. We'll go down to reporting date. This is going to be the date of the week that you want the report run for. For example, I can't remember what I ran a minute ago. So we'll run 01/31/05 to 2/06/05, and then the number of weeks is 1. If I want it to be for 4 weeks, keep in mind it's looking for the starting week here, and then I'd put forward. It would go forward 4 weeks and grab the information for 4 weeks. You can send that to a different spool file if you know who that is. If you want to send it to me, you'd put FMS CJN in here or whatever. Spooling level. Keep one thing to note: if you're running single store reports for like 10 stores and you're running them 10 times, there's no reason for that within the same environment or the same company. You can go in here and choose S for spooling level and say it was 421 through 431. I would get a separate PDF for each store once you choose spooling level here. So that's pretty big deal. Big time saver if you're running 10 reports individually. Okay, that's all you have to do to run the single store report. We'll run that and see what we get. Okay, we'll bring this back in. So on the single store report, like I said, it's one store per page, and you see each column is a department. So it runs through their sales for this year. If they had previous history in there, it would show up here and give you a variance. It gives you your cost of inventory if they want to calculate inventory every week. Otherwise, you just leave those out and have purchases and get an operating gross profit. Brings in wages and then gives you a departmental contribution to overhead. That goes all the way to the last page where you get a second to last page where you get a total store for the same information. And the last page brings in that same information to contribution to overhead. And then you've got this section that's user definable, so you can customize this in whatever accounts or things your client would like to see on a weekly basis. The client that I work with wants this to tie to their weekly trial balance, so it looks like basically a weekly P&L for them, or a weekly income statement. And the operating income then would tie to the trial balance. The only difference between this and the multi-store report is that instead of having columns here, it would say 100 grocery where it says Pasadena, and then you'd have 421 Pasadena, 422 store 423, 424, so on and so forth. Okay, the detailed general ledger is next. This is good for pulling out header information from the general ledger by account, by store, by department. I run this as a purchases ledger for the client that I work with on a weekly basis and send that to them. When I first came to FMS, people were printing out the entire general ledger every period and using that to do the accounting with. I don't know if people still do that or not. I think that's a pretty big waste of paper if you are doing that, but however you can get the work done most efficiently, certainly do what you need to do there. But basically what this is going to look like, and we'll run this for purchases. So you can run this by hierarchy. Typically you're going to want it by posted date, but you could run it by batch number or by vendor. You could do it by hierarchy. You can do a spooling level here if you wanted to do a separate report for each store. You could even limit it to certain transaction types if you only want to see certain things. But basically, we'll just run this for grocery purchases. Oops. And then we'll do it for see what we get. And you can leave subtotal by week in here if you'd like. If you're doing over multiple weeks, you can add some other things as well. So let's run that. Bring that into our spool file. Here it is, detailed general ledger. Okay, so basically, looking across the top, we have our company corp store that this report's for, the beginning date and the ending date range that we're looking at, and then the run dates and things like that. So we've got our department, grocery purchases DSD. Here's the beginning balance at 228, and then you see all the debits and credits that happened during that date range. You can kind of see it goes on for a while. Here's week 7, and you get a subtotal if you leave that subtotal box checked. So on and so forth to the very end. And then you have your, of course, your subtotal, and then it gives you your ending balance, which is here at the bottom, and the net period transaction. So basically your beginning balance plus or minus the net period gives you your ending balance, of course. But it also gives you a summary of each type of entry that happened during that time. So you can see your AP total, your AR total, so on and so forth. That's pretty handy. The last page is just the criteria you use to set that report up. Alright, the next report then is going to be the general journal. And just like it sounds, it's a journal of whatever type of entries have been entered into the system. So we'll look at Corporation 420, and you need to pick a transaction source. In this case, we'll pick journal entries. This is good, for example, if you're getting a new client from another FMS accountant and you want a list of what entries they've made for the last month or something like that. So when you make your entries for the current period, you're picking up everything. Certainly would want to do that. So let's pick a couple of stores here in the range, and we'll look and see what we can come up with. That's really all you have to do to set that up and to run it. Click OK. Let's see what we get. This happens quite a bit with my Internet Explorer. Just give it a second, it will fix itself. Okay. So the general journal then, as you can see, we did it for journal entries. We've got the entry number, the posted date, the description, and then the GL distribution. So you can see we've got some cash accounts that things are going back and forth between. So our debits and our credits for every entry that was put in there that are JEs. So again, if you're just now a new employee at FMS, or you just got a new client, it's good to run this for the last period, and you can kind of see what entries were made prior to you taking this over. All right, the last one we're going to look at is a trial balance report. This is a very, very important report. What you're going to want to do when you're doing your financial statements at the end of the period, the structured report writers can be manipulated. The single store reports can be manipulated. Anything that you're giving to the client that's not a system-generated report can be manipulated and may not be correct. The trial balance is going to spit out the balances of the accounts and what happened in the interim between whatever dates you put here. So if you put in your period beginning and ending date here, you can trust the amounts that are on the trial balance as long as the previous year has been closed to retained earnings like we talked about earlier. Then you can tie out all of your balance sheets, your P&Ls, all of that stuff to this trial balance, and then you'll know that all of your reports are in agreement with each other and they're okay to give to the client. We're just going to run this for a store though. We'll leave, to get the full GL, we'll leave department 0 to 99.99 and account 0 to 99.99, and we'll just put in a date range. Hit enter, confirm. Bring that back over, refresh our portal. There it is. Alright, so basically it's going to have the list of every account that's in the general ledger for that store, the beginning balance at 2/28, whatever happened during that time, and the ending balance at April 3rd. Goes through every account. You can see them all. And then at the end, you're going to have your net income and your loss. So, for example, in this case, this is crossing years, but in this case, if we were looking at a P&L during this time, we would want the current period to tie to this interim amount, and we want the year-to-date to tie to this amount, if there was one there. A balance sheet, of course, the income and loss on the balance sheet should tie to the year-to-date amount, and the total assets and total liabilities and equities should be in balance with each other. Cash flow statement, you're going to tie this out, and then the cash should tie back to the GL. So the trial balance is really useful in making sure that your financial statements are tying out. Now, that, obviously you'd have to reconcile all of your balance sheet accounts like normal, but the trial balance can't tell you whether or not they were reconciled correctly, but it will give you whatever's in the system, so you know your reports tie out. Okay. That was a reports menu that we're going to cover today. Next is GL account inquiry. So basically there's 4 ways to sort that information. It's by company, corp, and store, but you can sort that information in 4 different ways. You can go from 1 week of activity to as much activity as the client has in the system, and you can look at the individual account information. So let's bring this back over. Go to, from the general ledger main menu, go to inquiry menu, and then account balances at the top. And as you can see, since I have my company defaulted to 420, that's already in there. Well, look, you don't have to put a corporation number in. If you don't, and the client has multiple corps, then it will show all of them. We'll look at 420, and then you put in whatever beginning and ending dates you want. So in this case, we've been using 03/01/05 through 03/31/05, which you can see when I hit enter, it defaulted to the beginning of that week and the ending of the last week. So our system is based on week and not on days. So now we can look at the account balances in any of these ways. So if I had more than one corporation, the system would sort first by corporation, then by store, then department, then account. Or we could do corporation, store, account, and department. Since I only have the one corporation, those two are irrelevant. They're the same as these. It's department, account, corp, store, and account, department, corp, and store. The one I use more than any of them is this bottom one, account, department, corp, and store, because it puts all the same accounts together. So for example, I have the grocery purchases for every store. You can see account, department, corp, and store listed here. If you just wanted to see one store at a time, you had to go pick one of the other ones. But basically, once you're in here, you can filter around. Once you find the account you're looking at, you can go in here and view the transactions. And now you can see the date, the ID, the description. In this case, they're AP entries, so it's an invoice number and the vendor, and the amount. If there's an image, there'll be an I listed over here, and you can choose image to look at it. You can drill down and look at the entire entry. If you click on the row, you can drill down further and actually see who made the entry, when it was made, and you can just get a lot of information from here. Let's change the dates. Just curious to see what we get here. So now we have an image. So if I wanted to click there and click the image, it would pop up in the browser like it did before. Some other things you can do while you're in here, as you can see, there's different sources, CD, AR, AP. If you click source total over on the left, it will give you a summary of each of those types, similar to the detailed general ledger we just looked at. Also, some things you may not know is you can filter by source. So if I just wanted to see AP here, put AP in there and it's going to just show me the AP items that are in that list. This list is short, but if it was a really, really long one, that's pretty useful. In addition, we've got this operation field here and here based on dollar or percentage. So if I wanted to, say for example, out of that whole list, find an amount that's equal to 43.75, I would choose EQ for equal and put 43.75 in my cost value and hit enter, and it's going to give me everything with that amount. The other options would be, greater than or equal to. Now you can see it's giving me everything higher than 43.75. So there's some different operations you can do there. You can do the same thing with the percentages, same options. So it might help you find a transaction that might be buried in a long list of transactions there. Of course, fast exit's going to take you all the way back out. Journal entry allows you to quickly put a journal entry in while you're in here without having to go all the way back to the direct entry like we looked at earlier. This just toggles between posted date and transaction date. From the main screen, you can jump forward or back a week. As you can see here, we're only in 1 week, and it will keep that range. If it was 4 weeks period, it's going to stay as a 4-week block and just jump forward a week or back a week. But that's pretty handy if you're rolling forward, especially looking just for accrual purposes. And again, changing the dates, it's pretty easy to do. All right. Okay, we're getting toward the end now. Basically, we want to see, you may get questions from your clients and they say, you tell them something to click and they're like, well, we don't have that button. We don't know what that is, what you're talking about. Well, most of our clients have what's called the online in-store menus. And we're going to go over some of the different variations of those tomorrow. But if you want to see what your client has as far as general ledger goes and as far as payroll goes, what you need to do is go to the utility menu and go to the operations menu, command line, and enter in OIS. So let's do that. A couple of things you have to do first in order to make it work. You have to have a company defaulted for your GL, and if you're going to look at the payroll one, you have to have it for payroll as well. But basically, to do that, you go to General Ledger, and then down at the bottom you see this Set Defaults. So we'll hit Company, Corp, and Store, and in this case I have a company already defaulted, so I'm good there. But you just enter in whatever company it is. And then the same thing for payroll. We click Payroll, and you have to click down one more on Master Files, but it has the same Set Defaults down here. So you could go in and you'll put in a payroll client to set defaults for. Alright, then from the main menu you go to View at the top and Command Line, or for keyboard people it's Alt-C, and this box will open up. All you have to do now is type OIS for Online In-Store and hit OK, and now you see my menus have changed to what the client would be able to see. And they have limited options, so anytime they call you and ask you questions about what how to do something, this is what you should do so you can walk them exactly through what they see. So if I clicked Accounts Payable, all they have access to is vendors, transaction entry, payment processing, and inquiry and reporting. Under payment processing, it's interesting because they don't have print checks and they don't have update and all those things that we have to do when we do an AP payment process. For people with in-store check printers, we do have a variation that we'll cover tomorrow that actually adds those buttons in for them. But typically they don't have that. They can only go down to print prepayment. Under GL, they only have transaction entry. So they can do cash receipts, transfers, statistical entries, and then that user transaction, which is UJ. They can do some inventory adjustments, but we typically ask them not to. And then they can actually work with only entries by creation date. Under inquiry and reporting, they have the same options that we do. So they've got the account balances, and then they've also got those 4 reports that we looked at. And then, of course, they can create their own allocations and memorize entries. Then under payroll, they have 2 options, employee maintenance and time entry, and that's it. They can't do their own pay runs. There are some reporting here under employee maintenance that's covered during the payroll module. And then to get back to your main screens, once you're here, you just hit back and it takes you right back there. Okay, that's it for GL Part 1. We will do GL Part 2 tomorrow. This has been recorded and will be on YouTube at some point in the next week or so. But my name was Chris Nolan, and that's my contact information. Please send me an email if you have any questions, or give me a call at 1405.